All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our June 2021 International Environment Forum webinar. Our speaker today is John Krochmalny. He prides himself in being a practical person. So he would not tell me his academic credentials, but because he's a teacher. He cares about skills. He's retired from the Northwest State Community College, where he still actually teaches, however that works. He's teaching workforce development skills, and specifically his areas of expertise are industrial electricity, automation, process control, energy management, and climate control. He's an active IEF member. He also serves on the executive boards of Science Alliance, the Lucas County Impact Coalition, and volunteers for several socioeconomic development projects in and around his community of Sylvania, Ohio. And before I turn over the meeting to him, I wanted to let you know about next month. We are going to try something new with these webinars. We are going to have a discussion instead of a lecture. So the invite to that is in the chat, as well as some human resources for that John has made publicly available through his website, which is also there in the chat. He created a curriculum for individual values and character development focused for workplaces to give trainings to their people. So now let me turn the meeting over to John.
Okay, let me take over my PowerPoint and hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint. Thank you very much, International Environmental Forum, for the invitation and the privilege of presenting. And thank you everybody for attendance. I do consider myself a practitioner of things rather than a theoretician. I consider taking things, coming up with creation of a product and then implementing the product, and then doing the evaluation and continuous improvement. So that's kind of what I'm about. And in terms of the presentation today, Start Living to the Next Economy, there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you. And the way I personally learn is, rather than trying to copy down word for word what the presenters are trying to communicate to me, I pretty much listen to how the words are impacting my own belief. And if I need to have a change in attitude, well, I would be able to make a note of that so that I can investigate further and consider, should I adopt that idea, or maybe even that behavioral change. This is how I work. And my slideshows are going to be mostly pictures, but very few quotations. But nonetheless, I'm going to be bringing in the concepts of this next economy, what that is going to be. In the presentation of this program, I came out with 5 outcomes that I would like to see in this. Number 1, why the need for the next economy? And a redefinition of poverty, prosperity, and wealth to understand and perhaps change our existing paradigm in. Also, number 3, I should be able to relate wealth to well-being. How does one live in accordance with that next economy? And then the 5th principle I'm going to be bringing in is an attempt of how do you live to the Baha'i Commonwealth now? So in terms of why the need, I'll go into that first. Well, first of all, in terms of where I'm coming at in terms of this presentation, I'm referring to several texts. The first one, of course, is the Baha'i material. It's the manifestations of God that gives us the infallible information that we can use in order to adopt ideas and perhaps implement a behavior in light of that. Also, Adobaha and the Universal House of Justice encourage us to work with others, seek out knowledge wherever it may be. So therefore, what I'm going to be looking at is the books on poverty, and primarily the Bridges Out of Poverty program that I personally am involved with and have been for about 8 years. So again, why the need? Starting in the United States, probably around 1920, 1925, we made a transition into our economy. We were an agrarian-based economy up until that time. And then since that time, we were into an industrial economy. And with an industrial economy, you made product, and the product was predicated on the energy that you had available for that product to be produced, as well as the raw materials and resources to put together to form that product. And then based on the costs and the input of those two, energy and resources, now you've got a finished product that is then for sale on the common market and the exchange of money. Well, what happens if you live on a finite planet? The finite planet, you use the resources, and pretty soon the resources become depleted in one area. If you're fortunate, you can go to another area where the resources are available and extract that. Well, sooner or later, if you live in a finite world and you have an industrial economy, you're going to be dealing with resource depletion. And one thing that came to my mind back in 2005 was this document. Robert Hirsch was a contractor working for the federal government, Department of Energy. And in February 2005, they compiled the information and published this particular reference: the peaking of world's oil production, its impact, mitigation, and risk management. In the executive summary, the Hirsch report talks about the peaking of world oil production presents the United States and the world with an unprecedented risk management problem. In other words, in terms of an economy based upon production of things, what happens when you run out of material to produce those things? And from my own experience, you don't have to run out before there's a problem. All you would have to do is reach a halfway point where the demand for resources exceed the actual amount of resources, and then the economy starts to take off, the cost of the economy. So in terms of the Hirsch report, just dealing with that document, what we're looking at is the petroleum product, which represents about 30%, 37% of the total energy consumption in the United States. And here on this particular chart, you can see that petroleum is primarily based for transportation. Further in the summary, in terms of what they forecasted back February 2005, the Hirsch report says, in summary, the problem of the peaking of world conventional oil production is unlike any yet faced by the modern society. So in terms of where we're at just on petroleum, now you can see that we've reached a peak somewhere around 2014, and it exists around to this date. And if all the easy to get and available energy, petroleum energy, has been extracted, what's left is in lower quantity and perhaps inferior quality. And it seems to be indicating a change in the economy that is going to produce stuff. So if that's just petroleum, how about the rest of the resources that we use as a basis of an industrial society? Here you can see that from the visualcapitalist.com, here we can see that 2020 is where 2030 is going to be roughly the halfway mark between oil, coal, natural gas, and uranium. 2030, we're looking at perhaps by that time, zinc, silver, gold is going to be in short supply, maybe even totally depleted. And then finally, the other resources for an industrial economy, antimony, lead, iridium. So again, what we're looking at is depletion based upon approximately 100 years of an industrial economy, something that prides itself on the extraction of raw materials. So what we have here, if we do have a depletion of resources and the cost of those products based upon that input, what we're looking at is perhaps a period of degrowth. Here's my granddaughter, Cece. She's 8 years old. by the year 2030, she will be 18. She will take a mature position in the running of the world. That's her working with us at the Toledo Repair Cafe, something that our community started co-hosting several years ago. But the idea is that when she turns 18, what kind of skills would she have to use in order to work and thrive in that future economy? So it's our choice of a world in which to create, and realize that we've got a choice either to perhaps go into a survivalist mode, the survival of the fittest, or we can think in terms of how do we make things better for everybody, and realize that if we make things better for everybody at this particular point, there is historical evidence that it's been done before. Here is a graph regarding Pax Romana. The Roman Empire had a system of administration that led to a free and open trade agreement between the states and the territories of Eastern and Western Europe. And it literally thrived between 47 BC up until about 200 BC, Common Era. After the year 200, things started to fall apart. And finally, by the year 435 AD, the total collapse of Rome, the administrative order functioning to promote this economic development of Europe disappeared. So what we had was the taking over the barbarians, the different tribes, and that was perhaps the beginning of the Dark Ages. But realize that at 435 AD, there was a core of activity that was going to serve Europe ultimately to be the institutions that we now enjoy. For example, in terms of the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Christian religion started to take over more and more positions in community affairs. In John 10:10, Jesus is recorded as saying that I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. This is where individuals in Christian communities came together and literally tried to make things better. I'll point out two city-states. One was Lindisfarne, which was a monastery. That's a group of monks moved to northern England and established a community that ultimately adopted Christian values and character. The other one is in Lyons. So at the same time, the barbarians were perhaps trying to eke out a living in the absence of the administrative order of the failed Western Roman state. Lindisfarne comes up with a progression of societal advancement, social welfare, and we're able to produce documents that are now treasured in the English libraries and museums. And in Lyons, France, the same time period, here again, the Christian values of taking something, making it better, made a difference in that particular city-state. I'll bring up this quotation by Ugo Bardi. Ugo Bardi is a professor of science at the University of Florence in Florence, Italy. Here's what he observed. At the collapse of the Roman Empire, Western civilization had institutions in place to deal with social and economic problems. The Christian church, its monasteries and bishops, were the bridge making things better for people. Today, sadly, there is no such institutions in existence to deal with the future. I'll bring this particular quotation up toward the end of my presentation to look at the opportunities we all have in order to, if it's true regarding the depletion, what our possibilities of dealing with that would be. Abdu'l-Baha in the Star of the West is quoted as saying, man should be a constant source of well-being and contentment and a ready help to prosperity for multitudes of people. Here, I think we're looking at the divine purpose of mankind and where he fits in the rest of society. So in terms of why the need, if nothing lasts forever, if ultimately things go to the base conditions, the need for this particular economy, if things are not working, perhaps now is the time we could start to actually be a constructive element in a future that we want to go into. So any comments that anybody has at this point regarding the need, anything at all? I built into my my presentation these particular stops so that we can reflect on perhaps the material that has been written. Consequently, there's been a number of other institutions, organizations that are actively involved in deciding and maybe determining what that next economy is going to be. One that comes to my mind is David Horton of the Yes campaign. David Horton is creating an organization called the Next Economy. He works with Gus Faith, a federal energy worker at the Washington, D.C., and Gal Applovitz and Juliet Shore. But again, they're looking at, well, things are ultimately going to fail in our present economy. Where do we want to bridge to? Now's the time to start to think in terms of what we want to create rather than wait until it collapses and then try to scramble regarding what we need. Okay, if there's no other suggestions or comments, let's have a redefinition of poverty, prosperity, and wealth, shall we? Prosperity, wealth equals dollars, and that's perhaps our paradigm of understanding. Here you can see that on the left, Scrooge McDuck has got all these coins that he is able to enjoy life with. So in terms of the modern understanding, our mental model of prosperity, it's the dollars. And the dollars, of course, can buy anything you want. So in terms of the coins in the pocket, that represents a paradigm, isn't it? A paradigm is going to be defined as a standard, a perspective, or a set of ideas. It's your way of looking at something. And when you look at something, how do you behave toward what you're looking at? So in lack of a better term, a paradigm is going to be a mental model that you use in order to determine a behavior. And the behavior is going to have a consequence. Dr. Ruby Payne in 1995 decides to do a social science study regarding poverty and writes this book, A Framework for Understanding Poverty. And in her social science, it was revealed that the mental model that we all have is going to be the basis on how we behave when we're being given a position or a opportunity. The mental model is going to be the basis of a behavior, which because of the behavior has some sort of a consequence to it. The result of that behavior could be either good or bad, but the establishment of that behavior has a result, and that result goes back to reinforce that mental model to make it stronger. So realize that in this behavioral issue, the understanding poverty, the mental model or the paradigm that exists today is going to be an understanding of three classifications of class in the United States primarily. And the first class is going to be the poverty class. The second is going to be middle class. And the third is going to be the wealth class. And it's how we look at the individuals in these particular classifications and how do they behave to the outside world. So part of that paradigm, when we're looking at the poverty class, it's been determined that the people that are in poverty at this point, it's all about immediate needs being met. There's no concern about the future. If you've got a transportation issue, you solve it now. If you've got a position where you have to go to work and you need childcare, and for some reason the childcare was not available to you, you solve that problem right now, regardless of what happens in the future. The social science backing up the aspirations of the poverty class, it's all about the immediate needs. In terms of the middle class, it had been determined through the social science investigation that it's all about the future. The people of the middle class, it's not the wealth that you have, the money that you have, it's the philosophy that you have toward life. It's the denying of self-gratification for some sort of future event or future gain. So it's about the future. You take your investments for the future. You provide for educational funds for your children, maybe even yourself, but you're planning for the future, some sort of a future goal. And then finally, in the wealth class, it's about what do you do with the wealth that you have? It's all about your posterity and legacy. whatever you have, the institutions or whatever, it's about keeping it going and keeping that heritage. Again, these three analysis is going to be the paradigm of how the economy, how people respond to the economy based upon these three levels of class. So in terms of the mental model, you could be poor or you could be wealthy, and realize that if you're poor, you're going to be in poverty, and your outcome and your decisions are going to be based upon that. In terms of the wealthy, your decisions and behaviors are going to be leading to prosperity. This is the paradigm. In the advertisement of my presentation, I talked about the need for a new paradigm. And again, the paradigm is going to be our standard perspectives, our set of ideas that we are looking as a lens through the outside world. So the need for a new mental model that perhaps would be getting us away from the coins in our pocket and think in terms of prosperity, prosperity being in other terms. The Bridges Out of Poverty was a product of Dr. Ruby Payne, and she goes into quite a bit of detail regarding, number one, why the poverty exists, and number two, how do you get out of poverty? And the idea of getting out of poverty is beyond the governments and the social workers. It's really up to everybody. And it's also identifying poverty as this definition: the extent to which an individual does without resources. And in the book and in her study, social science has revealed that there are going to be 7 resources that need to be developed in order to exit poverty. It's going to be physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, your immediate family, social capital. Do you have friends and acquaintances that are interested in your well-being as well as you and them? Also, maybe your attitude of behavior that leads to a resilience in your life that you can roll with the punches. And of course, what's also included in here is money. Those are the 7 as indicated in the social science by Dr. Ruby Payne. So if we're going to be expanding our paradigm, let's consider what resources is. Now you can see that the resources is going to be a stock or supply of money. There's that word again, money. But it's also materials, staff, and other assets that can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function effectively. Now, if we could consider other resources and not have a money aspect to it, now we've got something to work with. And in terms of capital, the definition of capital, number 1, capital is of a business is the money that is available to pay for its day-to-day operations. There again, it's the money. The paradigm is involving the coins. But take a look at number 2, wealth in the form of money or other assets owned by a person or organization, or available or contributed for a particular purpose. And all of the resources and capital is going to be instrumental in the formation of an economy. And the economy, by definition, is going to be the term used for the production and consumption activities that take place in a nation seeking to efficiently allocate the nation's resource for the public benefit. Notice that the definition of economy does not involve coins. So here, in terms of an economy, the interpretation of the economy, how it should function, it's going to be different based upon who it affects and who is in the administrative control. It's different for politicians and maybe heads of state that deal more on a national or international basis. But what about on an individual basis and a community basis? And if it is going to be the capital that one needs in order to do these things, I'll call your attention to the Holy Quran. And in the Holy Quran, it talks about the 99 names of God that are identified. And the 99 names is going to be the behaviors of God that exists in his creation, in his creative form, in order to give us what we have today. The idea is that if God has these attributes and these behaviors, should we not adopt them? And some of the very few of the 99 I've got provided here. In other words, God, number 17, is the ever providing. Number 21 is the expander. Number 39, the nourisher. Number 42, the generous, the bountiful. and realize that if you're going to be any one of these particular behaviors, you have to have a source to use in order to provide it. For example, if you're a benefactor, you have to have something to give in order to be a benefactor. So if these are identified in the Holy Quran in terms of the 99 names of God, what happens when you apply it to the social science that is now available to us in the 21st century? And these are going to be the prosperity indicators that I found in the various Christian texts. In other words, do you have intellectual capital? In other words, are you literate? Do you have reasoning and evaluation skills? How's your language? Can you communicate orally and maybe in a written form to other people? Vocational? Do you have occupational skills? Physical health, mental health? How about spiritual health? Are you able to have a meaningful life with your present condition of health? How about your living capital, your ability to live well, a meaningful and purposeful life? Can you move around? Do you have good access to nutrition? How about the water that you drink? Is it clean? Is it healthy for you? And of course, energy, family, your social capital, your word, is it trustworthy? Your material, your housing stock, land holdings, community stock, your tool sets that you would otherwise need in order to function in a community with other people. And perhaps maybe even more to the point, your ability to think in the abstract. Plan for that future. And if things are dire right now that you're experiencing in your life, do you have an appreciative inquiry that you can rely on to look at your state and look into the future for a positive outcome? Appreciative inquiry. Agency, your capacity, condition, or state of acting or inserting power to accomplish something. Do you have the time? And of course, do you have the financial resources, are just one another area. So now in terms of capital and resources, you can see money is included, but it may be the least important of them all. Vaclav Smil, University of Manitoba, wrote a book, Power Density, and he makes a case regarding energy and finance. And in his book, he lays down in his 350-page document that energy is the only universal currency. It is necessary for getting anything done. So in terms of the coins in your pocket, it is perhaps subordinate to the energy that you have in order to accomplish things. Another way in which to look at it is money is nothing more than tokenized power. You can't eat it, you can't burn it, but you can use it for an exchange, and realize that when you use it for exchange, you can use other people's resources in order to supply your needs yourself. So in terms of the idea of poverty, the extent to which an individual goes without resources, we've got perhaps a definition of an economy that's looking at the health of your situation, immediate family, social capital, and resistance. The faith communities can bring in other identifications of capital and resources, such as literacy, housing, mobility, living, cultural experience. All of these things are going to be necessary for a happy, inclusive, and well-meaning life. And money is a part of that, but the money is not the most important factor. In 2005, under the Universal House of Justice's direction, One Common Faith was published. And One Common Faith talks about the role of religions, not only being a period of misery for the masses that believe to it, but also talks about the role of religion could play in the positive changes of the earth. So the quotation here, perhaps it is religion and their communities of faith that may have the greatest potential for any positive changes in the world. And when it comes to any kind of economy or change in the economy, the true value of a well-meaning life could be found in the values and character inherent in the world's religions. So in terms of the redefinition of poverty, prosperity, and wealth, what I contend is get out of the paradigm that it's all about money and think in terms of the other resources that are also indicators of capital and resources that you need for current coherent societies. How am I doing? Any questions, any comments, anything at all?
Have you looked at some of these questions, at these issues in a multicultural context? You know, I worked a lot in the Pacific Islands, and by Western economic measures, they're considered very poor, hardly any money. But when you look at the other kinds of capital, social relationships and, managing their resources in a sustainable way and always having enough because they never took more than they absolutely needed and so on, they consider themselves very wealthy. But it was a different, totally different context where the Western materialist perspective was totally missed the real meaning of what they had and what they were able to do.
Very true, very true. And of course, it's based upon their paradigm. And again, based upon their paradigm, they're extremely happy and content with what they have. Somehow in Western civilization, perhaps that idea perhaps needs to change. We have to have the money in order to be recognized as successful. So Arthur, you bring up a good point. In terms of relating wealth to well-being, Abdu'l-Baha in Baha'i World Faith is quoted as saying, the wealth of the other world is nearness to God. And it reminds me of the Lord's Prayer uttered by Jesus Christ, on earth as it is in heaven. So in terms of this wealth, if in the other world is nearness to God, if that's how it is in heaven, how do we bring this down into earth and provide well-being? Also, Abdu'l-Baha mentioned that which is truly spiritual must light the path to God and must result in deeds. So again, deeds, why do we do things? Well, it's the motivating force. And realize that the motivating force that we have in order to do things, it considers who does it affect, and as a result of what we do, what really changes. And you can see that if what we do affects people, now we can consider, does it affect only yourself? Or does it affect others, other groups, other organizations? How about the institutions? If you do something toward nature, does it remove something? Or does it restore, enhance, sustain a specific species or natural world? Resources, do you remove it or do you restore it, enhance it, sustain it? And of course, maybe to keep a process going, such as the process of our current economy. Does it impede or does it sustain and advance the system? So you notice in terms of who does it affect, we can look at the effect on things as a result of our perception of our self-interest or something that is involving a community interest. So take a look at this. I've determined that in terms of why we do things, I can put it into 4 categories. Category 1, total self-interest. Category 2, I'm doing things for self-interest, knowing that I'm going to get something, but somebody else is going to benefit as well. Position number 3 is I'm going to be doing something for somebody else, knowing that it's going to come back on me and benefit me somehow. And then number 4 is going to be the total mutual interest. In other words, you're doing it regardless of how it's going to come back to you, because it's going to be the thing that is going to be right for everybody. And realize that if you're in position number 1, if you're moving to position 2, 3, or 4, there's going to be some learning and training being applied as you're going into this. So in terms of the motivating force, if you're thinking about the messengers of God, where is their behavior? I think we can all say that is in the position number 4. It's total mutual interest. They're not in it for themselves. They're doing it for the sake of their followers and all of mankind. It's selfless self-sacrifice. That's their behavior. I would suggest that if we're dealing with poverty, it's all about the here and now and what you can do in which to benefit. And in terms of the poverty, if it is going to be a lack of resources, then in terms of how do you get those resources, it's going to have to involve some sort of program so that you can move out of this selfish attitude, progress to 2, progress to 3, progress to 4. So in terms of the behavioral barriers to getting out of poverty, a study was made in 2015 by a university, and here they're at: bad credit, unemployment, transportation, housing, and you look at all of these indicators, and they're all behavior. Change your behavior, and you exit out of poverty. So it's going to be a personal choice, it seems. Abdul Baha, in Some Answered Questions, says that for the understanding of the reality of things confers a material advantage in the realm of being and brings about the progress of outward civilization. But the knowledge of God is the cause of spiritual progress and attraction, true vision and insight, the exaltation of humanity, the appearance of divine civilization, the rectification of morals, and the illumination of the consciousness. Notice it's not about the money. So in terms of a divine civilization, if the model of behavior by the messengers of God is in position number 4, I would suggest that divine civilization is our change of behavior to the position number 4 as well. How do we do that? It's a matter of learning and application and training. So relate wealth to well-being. We see that the manifestations of God model the behavior, and all we would have to do to acquire well-being and wealth is to model that behavior. How did I do on section 3? Anybody?
I have a question or a comment. I'm going to have to study this. Once through isn't going to work for me, but looking at your chart 1 through 4 of motivation, you move from selfishness to selflessness. When you were talking about that, I was thinking that I was thinking about the invisible hand of economics, which is based all our economic laws are based on the individual being selfish. Otherwise, they don't work. And when I first heard the invisible hand, I was thinking of it in a religious sense, where which is you've described as step 4, where you're completely selfless. Anyway, that's just an interesting comment or an interesting point that you brought up in me.
Thank you, Mark. From my own study, I found out that the United States of America, which pretty much adopted the Adam Smith foundation of economics, did talk about the invisible hand, but also that the foundation of the United States in terms of its affairs of government really does not support a religion. And we don't have in the United States of America a state religion, but I've heard it said that the Constitution and the United States of America needs Christianity. In other words, it's the application of the values that Christianity brings, which is the same as what Islam brings, which is going to be the same as the other world's religions. So it's the character. Arthur, I think you had a hand up.
Yes, I think we sort of Adam Smith. I mean, he's often quoted as about self-interest, but he also wrote about moral responsibility, and for him, the two came together. It's been it is a distortion in economics. They've kept only the material side, and they've forgotten the spiritual side, even in his teachings. One concern I had in your analogy is that you seem to imply that being poverty is somehow a matter of choice, and we can make an effort to get out of it. But so often we've seen cases where the people who are poor are trapped in poverty because the system won't let them out. I mean, it started with slavery, when you were the property of somebody else and you had no choice in that matter. And then you have racism and other kinds of barriers, which means even those who might want to get out of poverty are trapped in it because of things beyond their control. So I think it's not entirely a question of individual choice. There's also other factors in society that need to be addressed to remove some of those barriers.
Well, there are exceptions to everything, but I'll say that in terms of poverty, looking at it beyond the coins in one's pocket, What about the social conditions that you're living in? How about your the resources that you've developed yourself in order to provide maybe a means in which to contribute your share to the outside world, which is all a part about the next economy. How do you live that next economy?
John,
So
could I,
yes, go ahead, Gary.
yeah, building on what Arthur was just saying, it strikes me that it goes to Shoghi Effendi's point when he talks about not being able to separate, ourselves from our environment. And, we could have the desire to change, but if our environment constrains us, that's going to be either more difficult or impossible. But you've got to have the desire too. So it's a both and, not an either or in most instances. And sure, there are ingenious or motivated people that can find their way back, but that's going to imply that they've got some of those other wealth skills that you indicated they need to have, which our society and education system often doesn't provide us with. So it's a real chicken and egg, both and kind of a situation. And as a society, we need to be aware of that dynamic.
Very true, Gary. And again, what I'm looking at here is money. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it is important. But realize, there's more things that make up a cohesive community than money. In terms of how do you live that next economy? Here, I'm going to be looking at how do you go about doing this? Unfortunately, I think here in the United States, the paradigm is you can't do anything without money. You may have heard the term time is money. If you follow that logic, if you don't have time, you don't have money. If you don't have money, you may not have time. And if you don't have time, you may be dead. Is there another way in which to look at our understanding of the role money plays in a well-run society? And in terms of the resources, what I'm looking at here is how do I, as an individual, or me living in a community, or me in a nation, operate and gather the resources so that I can share them with somebody else? And how does somebody else I share it with, how does he reciprocate what he's received to give me back what I need in order to keep that going? So in terms of the money, money may be important, but it's not the sole indicator of wealth, which is going to be, how do we live to the next economy? Here's the writings of the Bab. These are the appointed days which ye have been yearningly awaiting in the past, the days of the advent of divine justice. Render ye thanks unto God, O ye concourse of believers. Here, what I'm looking at is that in the 1840s, when this was penned, it was available and yours for the taking. It was yours for the taking, yours for the experience. And the hidden words of Baha'u'llah, number 31, O son of being, bring thyself into account every day, ere thou art summoned to a reckoning, for death unheralded shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give an account for thy deeds. So again, it takes constant effort in order to acquire these resources so that you can do something with them. So in terms of perhaps preparing ourselves to live to a next economy as we see it, maybe it takes an inventory of the resources that we have. If we were to look at the Merriam-Webster definition of resources and poverty, it's the state of one who lacks a usual or socially accepted amount of money or material possessions. Perhaps more of a current definition that is backed up by social science, and maybe even pointed to in the source of religion, is the extent to which an individual goes without resources. One is about money, the other one is more than money. So in terms of doing the resource inventory, looking at resources as a stock or supply of money, or materials, staff, or other assets that can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function efficiently, if that's what you need. And if that represents capital, in other words, it's something that you have in a form that is available for a particular purpose. And the particular purpose in terms of money is to get more money. But perhaps in terms of the community or the life that you have for your family, it means something different. And again, the capital identified in holy texts of the world involve literacy, employable skills, physical health, emotional health, agency. Can you plan something and actually put in the processes to achieve it? How about your imagination, your ability to look into the future and see perhaps a need and be able to plan according to how to fulfill that need? And perhaps appreciative inquiry, no matter how bad things are. Can you look in the future and look for some sort of a positive outcome and thereby develop plans for that? So again, what we've got here is going to be the involvement of the acquisition of those resources and perhaps a method of continuous improvement in order to keep it going. Thornton Chase, in his book, The Baha'i Revelation, has this. It is effort, struggle to make today better than yesterday, and to lay a new foundation, a higher base for the building of tomorrow. There can be no life without change. Stagnation is death. So again, what we're looking at here is continuous improvement in order to make this work. So in terms of the next economy, if we are asked to acquire resources to do something, then I'm looking at the number of resources over a period of time. And you can see it's an incline. Hopefully, if I'm going to be looking at myself today and making it better, the resources I would need would be ever increasing as time goes on. But as everybody knows in life, life is not like that. In other words, some days I'll have the resources, sometimes those resources will disappear. So this is how life really is, isn't it? Sometimes we got it and sometimes we don't. Baha'u'llah, in an earlier translation of Hidden Words, says, "Be neither troubled in poverty nor at ease in wealth. All poverty is succeeded by wealth, and all wealth is followed by poverty." So again, the manifestation of God recognizes the fleeting moments of our acquisition of resources. He also mentions destitution of everything that is besides God is the greatest gift. Despise it not, because in the end thereof, the wealth of God will appear. Well, that's interesting. If I remove everything except God, then that's all the resources I need. So again, in terms of the resources that are identified with God, going back to the 99 names, now what we're looking at is some behaviors or a state of being. These are a condensed version of the 99 names of God. And in the 99 names found in the Quran, words have similar meanings. So therefore, those are condensed and put on this chart. And the words on the left side of the chart are the state of being that one normally has, an attitude. And the one on the right is the state of action. What do you need in order to demonstrate generosity? What do you do to be able to restore things? The forgiveness. And of course, combining that with the other 27 indicators of capital. Now what we're looking at is resources for the well-being. So in terms of Baha'u'llah's counsel to believers, be generous in prosperity. Well, here we are. I'm prosperous. So if I'm told to be generous in prosperity, now's the time to expend those resources. Somehow try to make the world better. And of course, to follow and thankful in adversity. Thankful in adversity. I don't have any resources. I'm in poverty. So in terms of the adversity, that's what happens when you're in a recession or a depression. You don't have enough, and somehow your condition in life is being affected. What's the solution if you're going into recession and depression, this is where you start to acquire the resources. And it's an active part on your part. If you're deficient, go after them. And of course, to continue on, be worthy of the trust of thy neighbor. Look upon him with a bright and friendly face. Be a treasure to the poor, an admonisher to the rich, an answerer to the cry of the needy, a preserver of the sanctity of your pledge. In other words, in order to do this stuff, you have to have a bank of these resources to be able to provide that. If you don't have that bank of resources, you can't give that. You can't give what you don't have. So in terms of the resource inventory, I would suggest coming up with 5 concentric circles drawn in this pattern. Start at the beginning or start at the center and work your way out. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then put a number on them. The center point is going to be 0. Next one out is going to be 1, 2, 3, and so far. And now, once we have these concentric circles identified, put meaning to it. In other words, 0 means you don't have anything. You don't have nothing. Position number 1, not enough, which indicates a shortage. Number 2, you've got enough, but it's steady state. The resources that you have is immediately having your needs met, and that's it. Number 3, you've got more than enough, which suggests a surplus that you then can share with other people. And then number 4 is going to be an abundance. You got more than you need. So in terms of those resources, pick any one of these and put them in the chart and find out perhaps where you excel in, where you have a surplus in, maybe where your abundant in is, and maybe also identify something that you need to acquire. And then create your pie chart. Put in social capital, employable skills, trustworthiness, mobility. And now what you can do is do a resource evaluation inventory and find out where you are at before you make your next step. For example, if you look at this particular chart, there's no problem on trustworthiness. There's no problem on speech. But the places that I could be deficient in is agency, or maybe our community establishment, or maybe our spiritual health. If this can be an indicator of the areas in which we need to work on, now we can set up a goal and a process in order to gain those resources so that we can be able to share with other people. So when you're looking at those resources, whether it be physical health, community, skills, financial, or cultural, doing an accurate assessment. Are you just getting by? If you're just getting by, you're pretty much in the arena of meeting your immediate needs. But if we are asked by the manifestations of God to give to our fellow individuals, how do we get to the position where we can give back? So the idea here is that once we are able to acquire these resources, now we can actually start to give those back into the community for others to take advantage of. So in terms of trying to make things better with the existing resources, what happens with the resources becoming depleted? If the resources are depleted, what can I extract out in order to use to make my own condition better so that I can give it away? Here, what we're going to be looking at, if it's true about the role that depletion is making in the Western economy, how do we still honor this particular model that is given to us by religions in an area of continually less and less material resources? I'll quote Charles Hugh Smith, who talks about create value. If we're dealing with scarcity, whether it be the scarcity of industrial metals or the scarcity of truthfulness and trustworthiness in the part of social systems or political systems, build back value. In other words, contribute into these areas so that you can increase value. If you increase value, then that extra value then supports that next prosperous economy. And in terms of considering the value, looking at the different areas of your operation, In other words, in the effective areas, you can look at the policy structures and maybe an executive that passes laws and policy. That's more for national and international levels. But take a look at the community level, much more local, and of course the individual level. What can you do? So if those are the effective levels, realize that the solutions are also in those 4 categories. If there's a problem that an individual has about the inability to garner resources, there is an individual solution to it. Not to say that that solution is any more important than the community that the individual lives in. And that is no less important than the executive that is there in order to make sure that laws are passed that are fair to everybody. And then policy and structures having to deal with exploitation and the breaking of those laws. So the idea is that when you're thinking in terms of resource allocation for yourself, consider all the areas of the economy and realize that the areas of the economy could be national and also could be local. Many people think in terms of the need for change. They automatically think in terms of Washington, DC, or maybe some international institution. And that's important too. But what about the local areas, such as individual behaviors and the community that is affecting with community? So again, what we've got here is a way in which we can define our actions, whether it be micro or macro. And in terms of what's the difference between micro and macro, reminds me of the story of Abdu'l-Baha when he's sailing into New York City in April 2012. He's sailing into New York Harbor and he sees the city skyline and he exclaims, "How these people must love each other." Abdu'l-Baha was looking at the macro. In terms of the citizen of New York City that lived on the street, perhaps putting it into a vernacular, who are you trying to jive? Again, how do you look at things? What's the difference between macro activity and a micro activity? They're both important. And also realize that we're looking at a transformation of behavior. And in his book, School Power, Dr. James Comer did social science regarding the change of students. And it's all about relationships. He says that there is no significant transformation without a significant relationship. It works in love and marriage. It also works within education. The teacher has to fall in love with the students in order for the students to thrive and learn and excel. And realize that in terms of the next economy, it's all about a transformation of individuals. The next economy, it's going to be expending resources. That's what we are asked to do. But you have to acquire those resources to expend it. So acquire when needed. Do no harm and make things better. And making things better, where do you want to operate on? Do you want to do it on the local, community, national level, international level? It's up to individuals. Everyone is important. And I would suggest in terms of the sustainability goals of the United Nations, you got 17 to choose from. And it would be impossible to do all 17 at once. Perhaps you can start in your own sphere of influence, such as Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty. You can become a model of self-reliance and become a model for that person that does wise choices for others. You can also become a mentor so that you can share behavior techniques. And you can also assist your local community to acquire wealth. In terms of the Sustainable Development Goals number 2, no hunger, you can actively invest in food security programs, support community-supported farms. You can also purchase from local agricultural vendors. And you can also be a model for good nutrition. Suggestion number 4, involving quality education. We're not all teachers, but we can still support quality education by making a choice for ourselves. Adopt a culture of learning for yourself and be that model for others. Perhaps adopt and promote transformational education. In other words, of the theories of education that are out there, one that I adhere to is education should be transformable. In other words, once the individual gets the education, there should be some sort of an identifiable behavioral change that would show that education has taken part, rather than just having education stay in the head. And then lend assistance to all areas of education as your abilities require. Number 8, good jobs and economic growth. How about financially investing in local businesses? Support and promote innovation, because with innovation, things don't stagnate. If you think in terms of a bicycle that was patented in 1850, made out of wood with wheels, that was it, and maybe a pedestal where you sat, that was the original bicycle. But look at the bicycle as it is today. You've got alloy metals that make it lighter. You've got pneumatic tires, which make it smoother. You got chain drives and electric drives that provide for the movability and brakes. It was these things that were continuously improved upon through innovation, and perhaps purchasing and being willing to pay for quality. Number 12, responsible consumption. Reuse, reduce, enhance, reclaim, recycle. These are personal choices. Consider the purchase consequences of what you buy. And perhaps the best of all, adopt an attitude of repair of all things. And isn't that the divine plan that God has for us? The reclamation of our souls? Justice and peace. Perhaps add friction to predatory organizations. Reject all forms of corruption. Work to eradicate crime, which is pretty much dealing with people that have ultimate self-interest. So much self-interest that it's all their gain, nobody else's. So adding friction to these organizations, reject it, don't stand for it. 17, partnerships for the goals. And the partnerships allow people to work collaboratively. In other words, reduce the silos and partner up. Any power is going to need people in order to provide that power. And the power can be used to achieve and create. The writings of Baha'u'llah, thou must show forth that which will ensure the peace and well-being of the miserable and the downtrodden. Gird up the loins of thine endeavor, that perchance thou mayest release the captive from his chains and enable him to attain unto true liberty. And then it is clear that the honor and exaltation of man must be something more than material riches. Material comforts are only a branch, but the root of the exaltation of man is the good attributes and virtues, which are the adornments of his reality. Nothing about money. And that's the process of living to the next economy. How much do you got in terms of the resources you need? And you may need money. After all, if rent is due, you need that. But how about the others? How did I do on that one? What I'm trying to do is establish a new paradigm and realize that the new paradigm does have a place. And the place is, what do we do now in preparation for that future Baha'i Commonwealth?
John, how would you compare your idea of there's no transformation without relationship to the House's framework for action that we're implementing, the idea of a humble posture of learning, training institutes, and accompaniment?
Yeah, obviously I'm looking at it from my own paradigm of education should be transformational. And that's my gauge, I guess, is what I'm saying. So in terms of what is aiding to transform that behavior, part of it's through education, but the other part is through modeling, isn't it? I think it was Socrates that said that if you wanted to be a just individual, seek out a person that is just, in your opinion, and model his behavior. So in terms of modeling behavior, that comes with a relationship. If you're thinking in terms of people that need to change behavior, I'm thinking automatically of alcoholics, and realize that in alcoholism, there is a successful program called Alcoholics Anonymous. Notice the transformation of the individual alcoholic is done into a, number one, sense of community. There's a relationship among other members, but also there is a total dependency upon a power greater than yourself. So Gary, good question. It's one thing to understand.
Don't you think that the framework for action has all of those qualities that you're defining?
Yes, they could. They could. But of course, do the models exist in there? And again, it's probably community by community. It's one thing to read the material and have an intellectual understanding, but it's another one to
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's all on the implementation and the the context and circumstances that people are bringing to that process.
Sure. So in terms of living the Baha'i Commonwealth now, I'll go back to this quotation I mentioned earlier, Hugo Bardi. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, Western civilization had institutions in place with social and economic problems. The Christian church, its monasteries and bishops were the bridge, making things better for people. Today, sadly, there is no such institution in existence to deal with the future threat. I differ on his assumption. Going back to the first century Christian church, the small believers that existed in the city-states formed a community and established a social economic plan that caused them to prosper. And as a result of that, they became known by the greater community around them, and realized that what started in that first century Christian church was ultimately going to be the social and economic development that Western Europe had attained, and which we in the Americas enjoy as well. It had to start somewhere, and realize it was a small start, but a needful start nonetheless. Shoghi Effendi mentions that let there be no misgiving as to the animated purpose of the worldwide law of Baha'u'llah. Far from aiming at subversion of the existing foundations of society, it seeks to broaden its base, to remold its institutions in a manner consonant with the needs of an ever-changing world. Whereas with the early Christian church, they were developing processes and institutions that when the time came, the Roman Empire fell, humanity had something to jump to, and realized that what we have here in the Baha'i faith, it's not necessarily to build new, but it's to enhance, make things better. Gus Spaeth, who is a proponent of the next economy, talks about the next economy in the development stage, and he is opening it up to everybody to make suggestions. But nonetheless, here's his quote. I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do this. So in terms of the opportunities that we now have, it's no different than what existed around 435 Christian era up to 1300 Christian era. These were the Dark Ages. But you'll notice that the seed of civilization were contained with people of faith. And it was the decisions and the behavior of the people of faith that ultimately made a difference. The Renaissance comes in, and realize that the Renaissance was a time period between 1300 and 1600 Common Era. And here are some of the characters that existed in the Renaissance age. And I cannot find any document coming from these individuals that talked about them having a great experience living in the new age of the Renaissance. They didn't wake up, look out the window and say, hey, it's great to be living in the Renaissance. The term Renaissance was coined by a future historian. And a future historian was looking at the Western European timeline and seeing something that changed between roughly 1300 up to 1600. They saw a behavioral change and the effect that that behavior had on that society. And that's when they named it the Renaissance. There was a rebirth of Europe as evidenced by institutions that have been created, the increase of social welfare of the individuals, new learning, new technology. So again, the term Renaissance had to wait its time for a future historian to look back and see a blip that happened on human affairs. In terms of historical religions, instruction to mankind, in a very condensed mode, all the world's religions pretty much say the same thing. Take something, anything, and make it better. Mirza Yahya, I'm sorry, it wasn't Mirza Yahya, it was Mirza Abu Fadl. Mirza Abu Fadl, scholar of the Baha'i faith, pretty much said the same thing, but I have not able to find his quotation on this. But take something, anything, and make it better. So in terms of taking something, making it better, what's the motivation that you have for it? Create value, and whatever you do, create value in people, in nature, in resources, and processes. The Commonwealth idea, it is the superstructure of that self-same order attaining its full stature through the emergence of the Baha'i World Commonwealth, the kingdom of God on earth, which the golden age of that same dispensation must in fullness of time ultimately witness. In other words, the kingdom of God is at hand, and it's for us to develop. Did Jesus and his disciples, did the disciples of Jesus encounter the kingdom of God when Jesus was alive? And I would contend yes. The followers of Baha'u'llah that lived around Baha'u'llah during his lifetime, were they in the kingdom of God on earth? I would say yes, because it was a marked change in their behavior, and that behavior was aligned with the attributes of God. And it's up to us to bring it in. Today, the confirmations of the Abha kingdom of Abha are those who renounce themselves, forget their own opinions, cast aside personalities, and are thinking of the welfare of others. This is our charge. So in terms of living the Baha'i Commonwealth, why wait until somebody else declares, here's the Baha'i Commonwealth? Why not start the Commonwealth living today? So again, the first century Christian communities, they were the foundations of the modern social and economic institutions that we enjoy today in the West, primarily in the Americas and in Western Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. Now, in terms of being able to practice this idea in community, rather than think in terms of going it alone and becoming our model, becoming a model for others, is there somebody else that we can collaborate with and make it happen? I'll call your attention to Grinnell College in 2015, did a survey to primarily American citizens. And based upon that survey, here's what they came up with. 90% of Americans that were surveyed said that they believed in treating people equally. 88% of those responding took a personal responsibility for one's action and expected other people to take responsibility for theirs as well. 81% accepted people of different racial backgrounds. And of those who were surveyed, 78% came back with, yeah, they were acceptable of people of other diverse religious backgrounds. So here you can see that based upon this Grinnell College survey, how many people there are potential partners and collaborators with trying to make the world better. And if that happened in the United States, global citizenship is going to be recognized as a growing sentiment among the world's population. So this comes from Global Scan, and here's the result of their survey, primarily in the Americas. I see myself as a global citizen, then a citizen of my country. And you can see that we have anywhere between 30 to 40% of the people surveyed said yes, they are. If I look at Europe, Spain, Greece, United Kingdom, and more, now we're starting to see a little bit more. More people identify themselves as world citizens rather than a citizen of their particular country. Going on, Nigeria and Africa has even more. And then finally in Asia, China, India, Pakistan, more still. So in terms of being able to live the next economy, it's a personal choice, but realize that here is identified potential collaborators that can work with you and collaborate in order to bring that next system in. A woman went to Abdu'l-Baha, received his teachings and blessings, and asked for a special work. Abdu'l-Baha said, spread the law of love, live in accordance with love, reciprocity, and cooperation. What happens to any relationship if somebody does all the taking and not giving it back? Well, that relationship doesn't work, does it? When you're dealing with this idea of reciprocity, here now you've got a relationship building. I do things for you, you do things for me. And if I give you equal to what you give me, that's sustainable. But the idea here is, in terms of a future society, rather than live a sustainable life, how about a life of an abundance? In other words, I give you more. And as a result of their receiving this, the reciprocating action on their part is to give me more. One is a state of affluence. And the Bab says, "O my beloved friends, you are the bearers of the name of God in this day. You have been chosen as the repositories of his mystery. It behooves each of you to manifest the attributes of God and to exemplify by your deeds and words the signs of his righteousness, his power and glory. The very members of your body must bear witness to the loftiness of your purpose, the integrity of your life, the reality of your faith, and the exalted character of your devotion." That's our charge. And that is the next economy.
Thank you, John. All right, let's open this up for some discussion.
The important takeaway is that it's easy in a material world to think it's all about money, but think in terms of the resources you have to make it better. Me being retired, there's only so much money I can give away, but I do have resources and others that I can do and make the world better. And what's the glue that keeps society together? Is it the coins or is it something else?
Arthur.
Well, I was thinking about, we talked about the Renaissance. And what most people don't realize in Western descriptions of the Renaissance, historians, is that it was really the time when the spiritual values of Islam came into Europe. They brought the science, what they'd salvaged from Alexandria, so on, the algebra and so on. One of the popes, in fact, studied at an Islamic university in Spain before becoming pope. And so really the transformation there was the values that came out of Islam into Europe, and that brought a larger sense of cohesion. I mean, the whole idea of the nation state of the nation is founded on Islamic values. There's another aspect of that as well. Peter Turchin, who's one of the leading integrated thinkers at the present time, wrote a book about ultra society. And he said, when he came to try to understand what allowed the large empires to develop, humanity organized at a large scale. And he went all the way back to the Persian Empire. He said the only explanation he could find was religion. He said he was an atheist, but it was only when you had the administrators of the empire who were working for the good of all, who were driven by altruistic values, that you could get those larger scales of human organization beyond a race or a family or a culture and so on and so forth. The multicultural thing came out of religion. So I think what we're making about the values of religion are so important, that they are the foundation for building a future society. And I think you've laid out very well how, in a sense, the Baha'i pattern is the model for the next great step forward in civilization building. Thank you for all you've shared here today.
Oh, sure. One thing I found out in my own study is that people do poorly if they are prevented from any kind of personal exchanges. People do well when they are free to exchange with other people. And the idea in terms of the dark ages of Europe, what were the social conditions existing within each particular city, state, or area that prevented people from mingling with others? And of course, what suffers is the social welfare, the social benefit. I think, Arthur, what you brought out with the Crusades, notice here is a way in which to bring in other ideas which were truly beneficial to the people. So yeah, and again, going back to one of the ways in which we can serve the next economy is such predatory behavior of these individuals add friction to it. You can't control them to stop it, but could you do things that would be able to add more friction so that sooner or later it would be easier for them to give up rather than continue doing? And that is going to be nothing more than a cultural change. Christine?
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed your creative approach to this topic. It's always fascinating, to hear someone speak like that. It's great. I had the thought of, you basically created a theoretical foundation for something. And how this is implemented in practice is actually already in existence in seed format all over the world with the institute process. Gary already, referred to that, but it's really what you said. It's the empowerment and capacity building of individuals, of communities. You have all the ingredients that you mentioned. You have, for example, the importance of building relationships. The best way of building relationships is studying the creative word together. You become really good friends this way, much better than when you just have small talk at a party. Also, like, you develop the spiritual capacities and the values, and you adopt an attitude of learning and of contributing to the common good. And it's inclusive. It serves everyone in the whole world. It's open to people of all religions, of all backgrounds, economic, cultural, racial. And it builds community. So all these ingredients are really present in the Baha'i Institute process. And all we need to do is somehow to continue to learn how to use it and to implement it. So I thought that you provided a good theory to back it all up.
My wife is a practicing Christian. She's a member of Park United Church of Christ in Toledo. And she's been going there in about 11 years, but I am recognized as a Baha'i. Interesting enough, I've been adopted by their congregation and I'm a member by adoption. But with our small numbers of Baha'is in our local cluster, there's only so much power that we have. But we've partnered with the congregation at Park United Church of Christ to do some really outstanding things. But it started with trust building and relationship building. After that, we were able to do things incrementally according to the power that we have. Our last success is the establishment of the Toledo Repair Cafe. And that was as a result of consultation by both faith communities administration that came up with this idea that go out and fix broken stuff. And since then, other faith communities, such as the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo, Northwest State Community College, has been a part of our effort. So it really is multi-faith, but primarily it's there to make the community better. And the primary purpose is not necessarily to fix broken stuff. It's also more important to establish a sense of community. Our biggest partner is the library, Toledo Lucas County Library System. They hold the facility, and it seems as if in the surveys that were done as a result of our repair cafe activity, there is an uptick in community involvement by the citizens around that library. So social economic development.
A beautiful example.
Yeah, this, and when you look at humanity, going back to the pre-Neolithic age, where you got hunters and gatherers, and as a tribe, they would move to area. Once they ran out of food or resources, they go to another area and run out of that or whatever. What happens when it's time that children of maturity and marriage age, how can they select partners outside of that tribe? If they selected partners in that tribe, you can see that, genetic mutations and things like that, it's not good. You get the diseases of a depleted DNA pool. But the idea is one tribe had to have a relationship with another tribe. And how did that relationship evolve? There had to be some sort of trust building activity so that members, if you had sons and daughters, how could they meet and how could you accept it? And, and what existed back then was nothing more than trust building by doing. And in the 21st century, it's no different.
I have a question. You had the 5 concentric circles, then you added the pie chart, and then you added dimensions of resources that were more of a spiritual nature. That resembled the limits to growth chart that Rockstrom puts out. Was that intentional?
No, in fact, I'm not familiar with the chart.
I'll send it to you.
Oh, please do.
It's a nice advance from what he did. That's the next step, actually. That's pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. It's a way in which, how do you handle deficiencies? And for me, it takes much more of a way in which to do it. If I come up to try to brainstorm, I'm not as successful as capturing everything. But maybe if I put it into a much more technical format, and this is kind of what I did. It's not unique. I did some training for Jeep Corporation a couple of years ago, but in terms of their continuous improvement, they had a similar pie chart, and I did steal it from them, but it's all good, right? I shouldn't say steal. I should say I took advantage of their.
You built on it.
Stealing is against the law, right?
It seems that an important part of your model, and tell me if I understood your point correctly, is that we might see others as being in poverty, but poverty is largely a state of mind. And if, I believe I heard the statistic once that those with lower incomes actually give a higher percent of their income to charity than those of higher incomes. And that shows a state of mind. You feel like you're in a state of abundance. You can give away to others in your community. And those in with less financial resources often have richer social networks than those who are wealthier and more busy and with work and running around and their selfish activities. So is that part of the point, your takeaway?
Yes, it is. And realize that, it's one thing to look at poverty in terms of coins, but, and a person might not have any money, but take a look at his environment that he's in, the social family that he has, the friends. It's only one indicator money is, but look at the rest. And, go back to Abdul Baha's statement that if money was important, Jesus would have preferred it for himself. So, what do you do to be happy, have a well-meaningful life? Baha'u'llah lived in the mountains of Sulaymaniyah for 2 years. And you know, look at how many hermits as a result of the Christian church. Being happy with what you have. And again, if gold acquisition is going to be all important, realize that probably in the next 10 years, the easy to get gold is going to be tapped out, which means that there's no more resource. So if you wanted to prove your wealth, either you go after gold that's not going to be available because it's been depleted and somebody else has it, or you can determine wealth in other ways. Do you have intelligence? Can you solve problems? Can you improve on situations? Bringing value. Can you take something and make it better? I've retired as a community college instructor, but I still teach. And one of the courses that I teach is primarily for underemployed and unemployed people. It's a certified production technologist that basically gives skills, entry-level skills, to people that would get entry-level jobs in American industry, starting at $17 an hour. So if you're destitute, 8 weeks, you can qualify for a $17 an hour job. Well, I teach basics like how do you read a tape measure, how do you read a micrometer, technical things like that that industry is looking for. But 40% of what I teach is how to maintain that job or get the job. And that's through character and values. And that was the reason why I wrote that curriculum. If human resource departments had a problem employee, if by looking at the curriculum on the values and character, the individual going through the problem, it's still up to him to change. But rather than give him time off and firing him, here's a tool in which to help him improve his own conduct and make it better. And then once he does, if it's successful, be a valued employee in that company. It's all about changing the heart. Gary, you had a hand up?
Yeah, it's sort of a variation on the idea of the depletion of resources. And in some cases, is what's depletion really hoarding by, you know, some person or group of people that have that resource. An obvious one is money. There's tons of money out there, but not, you know, a few people have a lot of it, and a lot of people have less of it. Seems like this I don't know about, but you may have a better picture of it. Gold may be another instance. There are governments, you know, sitting on piles and piles and piles of gold, I think. I don't know what proportion has gone into making physical devices to where it's been dispersed and, you know, it's now in landfills or the ocean or wherever. But is it a matter of it being all those materials being truly depleted, or they're just being misallocated?
Maybe a little bit of both. My own opinion is that we'll never run out, but that's not to say that, well, if my entire well-being physically comes from the earth, what happens if that is not as available as it used to be? For example, at one time, all you needed to do in Northwest Pennsylvania is go to a pool, dump a towel in there, have the towel absorb petroleum, wring it out over a bucket, and then take it into your lamp in order to give you light. It was as simple as that back in the 1830s, 1850s. But what happened when everybody did that and there was no longer petroleum on the surface, now you had to drill for it and realize that drilling, you had to expend power and energy and resources to get that oil. Once you got out of the ground, you had to sell the oil for, number one, the amount of money that you put into it. So it's a return of investment on, well, it's our energy return on energy invested. There's going to be a point where you have the product, but it will be so far removed that would be more effort to get it than it's worth.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I understand and agree with that basic point. It's just, I was just trying to point out that in some instances, there, you know, it may not be, that may not be the problem. It may be the selfishness or some version of selfishness that is the problem.
Yeah.
But they're both problems.
Yeah, and in the United States, here's this big thing about financial advisors saying things are going to collapse. You got to buy gold, guns, and buy farms. Well, if you buy a farm, do you know how to grow food? You know, and if you got gold, are you going to be taking gold pieces and taking it to the restaurant to buy food? Or is it going to be more on relationships, you know? And maybe if the gun gives you personal security, would it be cheaper to have security of a community that's working in your best interest versus other? And you know what we're looking at here, I think, is how much value that you have to expend versus the value received. And if you're hoarding, you know, it's all self-interest. But if you share, historically, people do better when they share. People do better when they have associations with others.
Any final comments or questions?
Well, I think this has been great. I like this.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to present. Thank you, International Environmental Forum, for the format, and thank you for your attentiveness.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for sharing with all of us. Very useful.
My pleasure.